Today I'm delighted to have Andrew Black with me from Andrew Black Consulting. I've known Andrew for many, many years. He's an excellent planner, and before that was actually an excellent land buyer, which, as you may have often heard me say, is massively important because everything starts with land. So I'm really interested to see what Andy has got to tell us about land planning and all things development nowadays. Andy.
Good to see you, Paul.
Thank you for coming, mate.
Thanks for having me.
So, just for, well, you actually, and for people that might be new, so we thought we'd create this podcast called Inside Property Development to basically help everyone involved in the industry, and particularly people from outside the industry, to understand how it really works, because, you know, I don't need to tell you it's not easy, and it seems to be getting harder. And there's so many people involved now in terms of external consultants and consultees of all sorts that I don't think they really understand just how complicated it and difficult it is. And lots of people, I think that developers and house builders are just bullshitting when they talk about how hard it is. And so I thought it might be a good idea for everyone involved in the industry to sort of see and understand things from other people's points of view, so we could hopefully all start being much more collaborative rather than confrontational.
Yeah, like that.
So that's what I would like to happen anyway. But so now, one of the reasons I really like you is because you've got like quite unusual experience that is massively valuable, and not that many people in the industry have got. So do you want to just tell us how you got started?
Yeah, I mean, how far do you want me to go back, Paul? I mean,
well, actually, I was on one of these a little while ago, and someone really threw a bit of a spanner in the works. They said to me, like, what were you like at school? Oh. And that really threw me, so I'm going to do it to you. Okay. And what were you like at school?
Difficult to say, really. I mean, I was easily distracted, I suppose, easily bored. I wasn't particularly academic at school. I went to a pretty normal, comprehensive, nothing special. It was not like a down and dirty schooling like that, but yeah, it was just fine. I had a good group of mates, did a lot of stuff at school, had a lot of interest, but wasn't particularly kind of academically driven. I knew I wanted to go to university. I knew I wanted to sort of, you know, work in an industry. I was very musical at school, actually, and I thought for a long time I thought maybe music was the way to go. I was going to be a professional musician. I was going to go to music college, and as I got kind of into sixth form, I realised that, you know, music probably wasn't for me, and I thought actually it's not really something that I wanted to necessarily do as a job. And I'd always been interested in geography, in human geography, and in buildings and architecture. I liked. I remember growing up when I was very young. There was a development of houses being built round the corner from us, and my dad used to take me, and we used to walk around this development. It's still being built, and there's something about it, isn't there? You love it, Paul. That kind of building sites, in the equipment, the smell of plaster, the smell of wood. It's something really interesting, and I think it always interested me. And as I said, the human geography side I really liked, and I thought actually maybe I'll do human geography and do a degree. And it was actually a pal of my dad's said, he was talking to me about what I was going to do, and I said I think I'm going to do human geography. And he was a civil engineer, and my dad was an engineer, more kind of chemical engineering. And he said, no, he said, what are you going to do? You can't be a human geographer. That's not really a job. Well, I mean, it is. People are human geographers, but it's very academic, isn't it? It's kind of that route into academia. And he said, you should look at surveying or town planning or something like that. And I thought, yeah, when someone plants a seed, you all of a sudden think, yeah, actually, that does sound really interesting. And I looked into a few courses and looked at the prospectuses, looked at what you studied, and I thought, yeah, that sounds really interesting to go and do that as a degree and to learn about it. And I thought about doing a straight up planning degree, and I thought that's quite kind of narrow. I don't know if I want to be definitely just a sort of, I know I am now, but I thought, I don't know whether I just want to do planning. And I thought actually maybe I'll do something a bit broader. So I went to Portsmouth University, and they had a property development degree. And again, mate of my dad said, look, do something that's accredited, get a degree that you can become a surveyor at the end of it. It's accredited by the RICS or RTPI. And they had a really good course. It was straight up kind of property development, basically kind of, surveying really. And I did that as a degree, and it was accredited by RTPI and RICS as well. So it's quite a kind of unique degree. And it was really broad because you did a bit of architecture, you did a bit of quantity surveying, there was law, there was planning, there was all sorts of stuff in it. So it's quite, interesting. Yeah. And then there was different modules that you could specialise in. So rather than the kind of construction side, I did more of the kind of planning modules, I did more of the kind of property development modules and that side of things. And that was the degree that I did, and it was a great degree, great place to go to university, great course, got a lot kind of out of it. And during when I was at university, again, kind of, it's quite, I thought I need to get experience. I was doing kind of bar work before I went to university, and I thought I don't just want to go back and work at a bar in my kind of summer holidays. I want to go and get a bit of experience in the industry, and I kind of felt, and I still do.
So what was the degree? 3 years, 4 years?
3 years, straight up 3 year degree. And I did a bit of kind of summer internships while I was there, and I worked for quite a small kind of, basically an estate agent, but they did a bit of land stuff as well. Found that really interesting, but realised I didn't want to do definitely kind of estate agency stuff. And then my second summer, I worked for Slough Estates. I wrote to them and said, look, I'm after some summer experience. And they were like, yeah, come and work for us for a couple of weeks. And they paid me, not a lot, but it was really good experience. Made me realise I didn't want to do industrial sheds, definitely. It's quite interesting standing in kind of, Slough Trading Estate and realising what they do. But just gave me that kind of insight into, even just how an office works. It's really, I think it's really vital when people are at university to get that kind of experience, so that the first time they aren't starting a job is not, the first time they've been in an office, totally. Or just understood how it kind of works. So it was really interesting to sort of get that experience, and I think that is a really important thing that I really am strong on for people coming into the industry. We'll probably talk about it in a bit, but to get that kind of experience when you're at university, a lot of people do like a sandwich degree, but...
Yeah, that's what I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Where did you go to uni?
I went to South Bank. And
Sorry, I feel like I'm interviewing you, Paul.
It's all right, no. And it's interesting because I nearly very similar to you, actually. I wanted to be a property developer. I actually started out in construction. I did want to be a property developer, but I thought it was all about construction to start with. So I studied construction management, and I was a site engineer, actually. And then I've realised I wanted to be a property developer, and I also nearly studied planning, right. And decided, just like you, that it was a bit too... one thing, whereas I wanted wider experience. So I did land economics, and I personally, sometimes lots of people ask me, they want to get into property development. What do you think I should study? And I think, I must admit, I'd forgot that Portsmouth used to. Do they still do it?
I think they do. I think it's changed a bit. I can't remember what that degree is now called. It's not called property development anymore, but it's a similar course, I think, still. Yeah. That's more like, I think it probably is land economics or something like that. So yeah.
So I think advice to younger people or anyone that was thinking about it is to actually do something, well, certainly if you want to get into property development, something a little bit wider. Personally, I think planning is too narrow, unless, of course, you want to be a planner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and equally, a lot of people I know in the industry, and you'll know, did something completely different as their undergrad, did a history degree or an English degree or something completely different, and then did a postgrad, and that's a route as well. There's no kind of right or wrong route. But no, I'd never... From when I got to university, I knew I was doing the right course. I knew I wanted to work in the property industry. I knew that, I'd found kind of, what I wanted to do. There was never any doubt that I didn't want to kind of come out of that with a degree, start working straight away. But I wasn't quite clear of where I wanted to go. I thought at first I wanted to do the big kind of central London sort of, Knight Frank, Jones Lang LaSalle. I think I got down to their kind of, last 10 for a grad place there or something, narrowly missed out. Felt a bit gutted about it, but you kind of find your way, don't you, with these things. And I left university. I worked for a small firm that were, again, kind of estate agents, but they did a bit of development work called Ludlow Thompson. They're all over London and the South East. And it was really good kind of starting kind of, I was 21. I was living in London. You know, it's great kind of to work in that sort of environment. And funnily enough, they did a bit of land and new homes, and they were doing a bit of, I think it was helping out with them on a sales side. And Ruskin Homes, you remember, they were buying a bit of kit down the road, and they wanted some comparable evidence. And I got talking to their land director, and you know, had a few kind of phone calls, and I think then he kind of came and bought me coffee at some point, went for a drink, and he said, you know, how do you feel about coming to work for us? You know, you got to know me a bit. I was like, yeah, be really good. And they were a really small kind of outfit. I think you must have come across them.
Yeah.
And there was probably only about 20 people. It was like a family business based in Caterham. So this would have been 2002, 2001. And a really grounding. So I went in more as a kind of land person into there.
What's that, like trainee land buyer or
something
like that?
Trainee land kind of person. They were doing stuff out in Essex, doing stuff out in Kent, and it was very much old school. Go and have a look for land, go and plod the streets, go out there, knock on people's doors, find it all. But at the same time, they didn't have any in-house planners, they didn't have an in-house architect. So as a kind of land manager there, you were kind of doing the whole thing. And it was a really good kind of grounding, because they built their own stuff as well. So it's out on sites, just kind of seeing it all. And of course, you know, we're talking about how much it's different now. That was the old PPG3 days. They were buying houses in Reigate or Sidcup or, you know, Carshalton, knocking down a big banger. You could buy it for cheaper back then. You could probably buy it for 300-400 grand and build 15 flats. No affordable housing needed. No, and if there was, it was always really easy back then, wasn't it? It was kind of, you knew you were going to get grant for it. No biodiversity net gains, none of the sort of stuff that we've got now. I'm not saying it was easy, but it was, you know, look back on those days, it was easier, wasn't it? And it
was hard at the time, wasn't it? It was still hard, but looking compared to now, well, maybe actually it's just because we've been doing it for longer and we've got better at it. But I mean, there's a lot more hoops to jump through nowadays, aren't there?
Oh, definitely. And, you know, looking back then, that was a great grounding in the kind of, you know, my first proper job, not Ludlow Thompson's a proper job, but first real development job, and I loved it, Paul. I just was so absorbed in that kind of industry and meeting people, and you realise when you're in that world, it's about people. You're meeting people all the time. You're out there in all weathers. You're seeing stuff that you're buying kind of get built. It's such a buzz, isn't it, for that?
I remember when I first started, I loved it. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
What was the first site you bought then?
The first site I bought was in Wanstead, and it was again single house and corner plot, and you know, effectively found it myself as a site.
Well, so you just spotted. So this would be interesting as well, because like people nowadays, what with all the software and what have you, clearly will have no idea what it used to be like. Yeah. You know, in terms of digging out sites like that. So how did you find it?
So that was like, you know, I was told look at different towns and places, and at that point we were looking at kind of Kent and that sort of area, and it was basically, it's got to be within a 15-minute walk to the station, and just looking for something like that was a large house on a large plot, and you were just out there with a map, with a dictaphone.
So you literally walking the streets,
yeah? Literally just walking the streets and getting out there, then you'd write to them, you'd find out on the land registry what it was, and then of course, you know, you do a bit of research into it. That was when, if you wanted to research into planning history, you had to go down to the council and get on the old microfiche stuff and have a look at it.
I often tell people about that hunt around in the dusty cupboard for probably a week.
That's it.
It was unbelievable, wasn't it?
And it was a different world. But you know, that was, and we got planning on that for, I think it was 9 flats. Still looks good now. Kind of, you know, driven past that since, and that'd have been, you know, 23, 24 years ago. And built that, and bought a few others for them, places out in Essex. We did a few sites, Caterham we did one. So there's quite a few different bits that I did for them.
Didn't do one in Norwood Green, did you?
I didn't. They might have done.
Okay.
Yeah, they did quite a lot in kind of Surrey and that sort of patch, and they did a few out in Essex.
Yeah, I used to come across them a lot actually when I was at Langs. They were because we were looking at lots of the same sort of smaller sites, you know. So.
Well, that's where then we were bidding on something that was in Dorking, and they were bidding on a site, and we outbid Carla Homes, and that's how I got to know Carla. And Carla kind of, approached me and said, well, we realised that you bought that site, and I think actually we weren't necessarily the highest bidder. I think they just quite liked us. Often the way with deals, isn't it? You get the deal because of the kind of link you make. So kind of Carla approached me then after I'd worked at Ruskin Homes for, I don't know, it was about 3 years by that point, and said, look, why don't you come and work for Carla? And Carla, a kind of bigger developer, really interesting kind of background, and I wanted that sort of step up at that point. I thought, this is a good progression. So then I was more kind of land and planning with them, so doing a lot more of the planning stuff, and they were doing some big sites. They had a big one down in Winchester at that time. It was like 1,500 units. The bigger stuff. It was all kind of quite interesting. And then, met people like Potsy and others through Carla. And I was, again, a great kind of company, really liked working for them. Great kind of to see them. I mean, it's so different to what Carla are now. That was 40 of us in the Staines office, and that was the southern region. Now they're a huge kind of operation, all that time later.
Yeah. I used to like Carla, actually. I mean, they had... Look, obviously I'm biased because I think Lang's used to have the best training in the industry, and a lot of really good people came out of Lang's. So there's quite a few Lang people ended up at Carla, didn't they?
Yeah, and I think that didn't Graham Cunningham?
Graham was ex-Lang's.
It was Lang's, and he came in as the land director after I'd been there about 6 months. Great guy, Graham. Really kind of took me under his wing, taught me a lot. I learnt a lot from Graham and others there, and it was great. It was a really good progression for kind of me personally being there, and I thought that was it. I thought that's all good, but of course then kind of 2007, 2008.
So how long were you there?
So I was there for about 3 years again.
Okay.
So then 2008 came around, crash happened, and the land lot were out. That was it. And
is that what happened? Because I mean, I was long out of the PLCs by then, so I was doing my own thing. By 2008, and I've got to tell you that was seriously painful. But so what happened? Everyone got laid off, did they?
Yeah. So I remember it really vividly that we were there, and we used to have a Monday morning meeting, and the salespeople used to say how many they sold or reservations they took at the weekend from the sales places. And I remember just hearing it kind of throughout 2008. It went from kind of really healthy weekends to sort of 5, 4, 3, 2, and then no reservations, nothing happening. And then that kind of summer of 2008 came round when Northern Rock, and all of that started to happen. We all remember it really vividly. And we knew the writing was on the wall. I think it was clear that it wasn't, we weren't buying anything, and a lot of places had shut up shop already. There was a lot of other redundancies going on. So it kind of came round to that summer, got made redundant. I was really gutted about it at the time, kind of thought, this is a real kind of difficult moment. And then I thought, well, actually, this is really tricky because there weren't other land jobs. It wasn't like you could walk out of that place and go and walk into wherever, Crest or anywhere else. No one was recruiting. So at that point, I had a bit of a kind of, existential sort of crisis of, well, what am I going to do? My kind of land, sort of the career I've built has been more on land than planning. But I thought, no, I have been doing a lot of planning. And I thought a bit about, what should I do next? And then when I first left university, I was living in Tower Hamlets, right? And I saw that Tower Hamlets Council were recruiting, and someone else had said to me, like, being in a central London authority as a planner, it's not a bad place to be for, while this credit crunch calms down. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe I'll go and do that for 6 months, and it'll all calm down, and then I can go and get a job again. And little did we know how long it was going to last. But so I went to Tower Hamlets Council then, working as a kind of planner there. But
oh, did you?
Yeah.
See, I didn't realise you did that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. How long were you there for?
3 years. So
wow.
It seems to be 3 years.
Yeah.
So I went as kind of initially I think it was a year contract, but it wasn't as a planning officer. So it was a really interesting job where they had a lot of land, a lot of assets. They were doing a lot of estate regen. Of course, it was an Olympic borough. You had High Street 2012. So they needed someone to kind of come in and work with kind of planning, but with assets, with different departments, and sort of just make things happen. So it's a really interesting kind of job that I kind of carved out, and worked on some really good kind of estate regen work. There was a really good kind of healthy planning team there, local plan stuff. They were doing their building schools for the future at the time. So it's a really kind of actually vibrant place to go and work. And I just thought, it wouldn't be that long, but actually, and it suited me at that time. The kids were quite young, so kind of being in that sort of, environment worked really well. And actually, that enabled me to get kind of, properly qualified as a planner while I was there as well. I'd done the surveying, when I was at Carla.
Ricks, yeah.
So that was kind of really, really helpful. And then while I was working there, that's when I came across PRP.
Just a quick word to say thank you to our sponsors, LandTech, creators of Land Insight, which is the industry-leading bit of software to help developers find and analyse the potential of real 100% off-market development opportunities. I've been involved in the business for over 10 years now, and if you don't know what it basically does what people like me used to have to do the old-fashioned way, which is hunt around and get together all of the key information that's needed in order to make sensible decisions on the development potential of land. So that's planning data, market research, lists of all of the various constraints, environment and agency information, you name it, massive long list of all of the stuff that you need in order to find out who owns land, what policy constraints there might be, and exactly what you may or may not be able to do with it. All of the industry leading developers use it, and also the most clued up smaller ones. So if you're not already using it and you want to trial for yourself, have a look in the show notes. You'll find a link to get a free trial, test it for yourself, see what you think, and hopefully get busy finding real off-market development opportunities. So thanks again to our show sponsors, LandTech, and let's get back to the show. So the 2008 crash,
Yep.
That's interesting because, lots of people in the industry, obviously including newer developers, but and not obviously, look, people on the outside got no idea how painful it was, right? Yeah. But so I think it's worth us coming back. We'll touch upon that because there's some interesting lessons for people to learn from that. Particularly the new people that they got literally no, they would have only seen relatively good market share. There was obviously building schools for the future. That's a whole nother big long story. Loads of work done on that, and then it got kiboshed by the government.
Yeah.
May or may not have time to go into that. But now working for a local authority, now that's really interesting because in due course I've got a few local authority planning mates that I'll get on here, including some quite senior ones, because I remember probably for the first 10, 15, maybe even 20 years of my career in land and development, I didn't like planners very much, to be honest, because, we're trying to do deals, they're making our life hard. There was a lot of moving of the goalposts. Yeah. The system's never been perfect, so they weren't always my favourite people. And but now, of course, again, maybe it's just because I'm older and more experienced and sort of calmed down a bit, I sort of appreciate the difficulties that they've got to deal with as well, particularly now. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than being a local authority planner. If you're a good one and you're keen and you want to try to help good development get created, obviously not any old shite, of course, but you work really hard, and then you've got some untrained planning committee completely undoing everything, all of your hard work, just like that. It must be massively frustrating,
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, I would say Tower Hamlets was very different. They were pro-development. There's a lot goes on there. I was shielded to an extent from the politics side, so I didn't have to deal with a lot of that, which is probably quite good. And it is probably a lot of different to the experience that we probably think of outside of London with local authority plans. But I got so much out of it, Paul. It's such a great place to work. Learned so much, and I still kind of think anyone that is in our industry, I think it is such a good thing to have worked in a local authority, to have that kind of understanding of how case officers work. And there's no doubt about it that that was late 2000s. Now being a planner is much harder work. The caseloads, what they've got to deal with, it can be a really, really tricky. So it was kind of very much a glory days of Tower Hamlets when I worked there, and it was a great time to work there. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's tricky now, and I did have a sort of, I guess, a preconceived idea about what it would be like. And yeah, there were definitely frustrations there. It's very different to working in the kind of private house building industry, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of things that I took from that were so helpful in where I went next, really. So it was quite interesting.
So for perhaps less experienced people or people that still hate planners, any advice for them in terms of how they could make things a bit easier for themselves?
I still think that our industry is about people, and it's about speaking to people. It's about understanding them, what their job is, what they do, about them, and I think that you've got to still try and build that relationship. If you're putting a planning application in, you're going to get a case officer. You've got to be able to kind of build that rapport with them. If you're a decent planner, if you're a decent developer, you should be able to pick up the phone to a case officer. I was talking to someone earlier on. You should still be able to build that rapport with them. It doesn't mean they're going to grant you planning permission, but I think it's having that communication with them, being able to speak to them on their level, to have that understanding of what they're doing. I think it's so important to do that. With not just with planning, with everything, I think. But I think you'll get more back in a relationship if you try and build that. But it's much trickier to do that now.
Well, exactly, and therein lies a big part of the problem as well, though, isn't it? Because as I think you mentioned, local authorities are so under-resourced. That whilst you and I know that is the way to try to do it, sometimes it's hard to even get someone on the phone or have a conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, very difficult. And now we've got situations where local authority planners are so overstretched. You're just not getting a response on something. We've got loads. We've all got it where we have a situation where we put an application in, you don't get anything back for 7 weeks, and then on the 8th week they pick it up and they say you've got some problems with it, going to refuse it, or you have to withdraw it. And that's not a good situation. And that's not the planning officer's problem.
No.
Most times that is just a resourcing thing, the expectations that they've got on them. And there has been a pull of, I think, a lot of the good talent in local authorities have gone private. And it is an issue. And I think that's one of the things that the government talk about, we're going to fix the planning system, we're going to fix but that will take a generation to shift, to get that.
Well, look, I'm sure I won't. Well, I will answer your question for you. Actually, I'll tell you what I think, and I'll be surprised if you haven't got the same answer. I mean, if there was one thing I could do to improve the planning system, it would be just resource it properly. Yeah,
I agree. But I think that in resourcing it, I think one of the things is that they've got to let planners be planners a bit more. There's some really talented planners out there. If you're a local authority planner, imagine you've got 100 cases on, 10 of them are nice developments, right? 90 of them are clearing conditions. Why should local authority planners have so much with clearing conditions or listed building application or all things like that could be really easily outsourced if they thought about it well. And I think to free up planners to work on the really kind of important applications, to work on the things that are, the bigger side would be an easy thing to do for the government, but they haven't quite figured it out. Building control, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was all through councils. It's not anymore, is it? You can go and pick and choose who you want. And I think that a lot of the big developments should still be run through local authorities. Absolutely, I'm not saying outsource that, but there's so much that you could outsource.
I think that's a really good shout, actually, because I know, well, at Barnet, you probably know, did the whole thing, and it went well, as far as I'm aware, and I could definitely see how people, look. Generally, I'm sort of anti-privatisation. I wasn't years ago, but now, based on the debacle of things, particularly the water industry, that's a whole other story. So I can see how that wouldn't go down well with people, sort of completely privatising the planning system. But definitely, I think that's a great shout in terms of conditions and just the tons of admin ball ache stuff. I got, you know, and us as developers causes us massive problems. I mean, one of the things that drives me around the bend is people talking about land banking.
Yeah.
And like inferring, like developers, like, yeah, we've all got this land, planning permission ready to go, and we're just sitting on it. I mean, anyone in the know, like, knows that's just madness. You would just never do it. You know, part of the problem, or the main of the problem, is, you know, infrastructure, Section 106s, and planning conditions.
Totally.
Like, you know, it's just unbelievable, really. So I think, yeah, getting that outsourced would be a great shout.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we were talking about it before, looking back at when we were doing, you know, back at Ruskin Homes, the land guys were doing the planning applications. It was pretty straightforward to put in a planning application back then. Now, the amount, as you know, the amount that you've got to have with that planning application that is supporting it, all the reports that are going into it, all of the different things, yet it's still that person at the other end that's still expected to go through all of that. And I think it's really tricky for a lot of those local authority planners to deal with that. And of course, at the same time, they're dealing with appeals when their members turn things down, when councillors turn things down. Unfortunately, it's not those councillors that have to defend the appeals, it's the case officers. So you've got case officers that are trying to balance 100, 150 applications, but then they're doing a public inquiry once every other week. I did 2 public inquiries last year. That knackered me. To do kind of all of that, I think it's...
I'll tell you a story here, actually. So, you know, for people that are watching this on YouTube, we're sitting in one of my latest developments in front of the fire, and I thought it'd be interesting to show you it. But here, so this site had so it's Greenbelt, AONB, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, had a 35-year history of planning refusals before we came along, and it's Chiltern District Council, or it was, before they merged, historically a pretty anti-development local authority, to be quite honest. They don't really like change at all. This site had a really messy planning history. I could see the potential and thought, you know, we're the only way we're ever going to win this is on appeal. I didn't think we would negotiate it because it was, you know, so complicated, really. Anyway, came up with what I think is a fantastic scheme. Did it all the right way, preamps, negotiation, feedback, you know, really tried to do it the right way. And I was amazed that the planning officer, in the end, I don't want to say too much, I don't want to get them in trouble, right? But so I don't want to give any clues. They loved it, and they said, look, like, great, I'm going to recommend it for approval. Wanted to you know, because we ticked all the boxes, wanted to recommend it for approval. Obviously, go upstairs for the sign-off. Oh, no, we can't, you know, I know, obviously, partly the planning history, partly the previous landowner, I think, had pissed the council off over the years. Partly, they don't want to be seen to set a precedent for Greenbelt sites.
Yeah, councillor in the background somewhere.
Yeah, or you know, usual story. So, of course, we got refused, had to appeal it. One, luckily enough, the planning inspector also loved it. But having said that, you know, different planning inspector, different day, got out of bed the other side, could have gone the other way easily enough. And the planning officer, remember, who's now at the appeal, standing up, arguing against the scheme that they thought should have got consented. So after we won it, sends us an email saying, look, great scheme, so glad you won it, can't wait to see it built. So, you know,
such a long way round to get there, isn't it? Yeah.
Bullshit or what?
I've had that. It's such a common story, you know, that sort of, it's unfortunate, isn't it? Because, you know, clearly that case officer saw what you saw and saw what you were doing.
And I've got to tell you, so some people might be listening to this on audio, some people might be watching it on YouTube. What we'll do, I'll add a few pictures of this, the before and the after, because I guarantee you, you know, this is not what, you know, when people see the before and they see the after, because it basically took us 5 years. Remember, it's 35 years of refusals before we came along. When people see the before and the after of this, I guarantee they're going to, well, two things. They're going to be, well, I didn't realise green belt sites look like that.
Yep.
Right? Because everyone thinks that they're all forests and fields, which you and I know that they're not. Personally, I don't want to be developing forests or fields, but there's plenty of shite brownfield sites all over the place. So I think when people see the before and after, it's going to be, wow, I didn't realise green belt sites were looking like that. Yeah. And also, how the fuck did it take 40 years to be allowed to change from that to that?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's pretty indicative of a lot of the bullshit we have to deal with, really.
It is, but and I hope that sites like this serve to educate people on how it should be done, and I do think there should be in the planning system in general more sort of best studies, best practice, educating it. The training of new members. They should be bringing councillors down here, even from other councils.
Well, that's what I want to do, and that's one of the reasons for actually starting this whole podcast, to get councillors involved, get NIMBYs involved, get objectors involved, and get how's it? Let's understand it from your point of view, because and this again, one of the reasons that I want to start doing this. One of the reasons I started my training business is because honestly, I dislike shite development and shite developers probably more than anyone, because it doesn't have to be that way, and it gets us all a bad name.
Completely, Paul. And also, we drive around all the time and you see places that used to be fields, greenbelt development, and what a lot of the house builders have done in it. You drive past and think, really? That looks fucking awful. And it's such a missed opportunity. And the amount of decent developments that we know, we could point people out to them, are unfortunately still too few and far between. And actually, if you blindfolded someone and took them to a development and did their blindfold and said, "Where are you?" you wouldn't know, would you? There's no, and I think there's too much of that goes on. There's too much mundane and ordinary that we don't like. But things like this need to serve as the way to do it. I think the fact that you had to go through that appeal was necessary, but at the same time could have been avoided really if you had the right way of doing it. And it's
well what I want to do here. So there's a fantastic, I think, organisation called Building with Nature, who they've been around a few years now, but they're not massively well known, and I only really discovered them a couple of years ago myself, actually, and then I trained to be a Building with Nature assessor, not because I want to be going around assessing other people's schemes, but just because I really want to understand the best ways to do it. So I was actually following all of the Building with Nature principles here before I even knew it was a thing. And there's a big focus here on biophilic design and a whole load of other stuff, which I'll talk about in future podcasts. But personally, I think a fantastic policy would be that maybe on the right occasions, previously developed greenbelt sites could be released, and even the greenfield stuff, some of it, right? But they've got to follow, for example, the Building with Nature principles, because they can, particularly when you've got low existing use values, like you have on, edge of town greenbelt stuff. There's not enough land, there's not enough brownfield sites for all the housing to be provided within existing settlements, basically.
Exactly. People have done the sums, and there's lots of reports written about it that just show there's just simply not enough sites that could come forward to meet housing needs on brownfield alone. So sites like this, and even, look, dare I say it, green fields that are undeveloped serve a purpose for delivery of housing. It's a classic thing of you've got to look at the benefits against the impacts of it, and if it's a green field and all it's ever been used for is agriculture, there's probably zero biodiversity value in it anyway. So developing something that's really nice, if it's a sustainable site, if it's well located, if you can create a community, mixed communities, affordable housing, other things, I think the benefits are going to massively outweigh the impacts and something like that, and it needs to be done. But unfortunately, I do, and I've got a couple of strategic greenbelt sites myself that are similar to that. They weren't previously developed. They are right on the edge of town. In fact, a couple of them are actually infill, surrounded on three sides. And but on all my future stuff, I mean, I will be pushing Building with Nature and trying to do something a bit different to not your
standard.
Oh, I think it's
boxes,
really important.
You know?
But like going back to that greenbelt thing, it's mad. You've done it enough times, standing in a hall somewhere, doing a consultation about building on a greenbelt site, and everyone comes in and they're aghast that you're building on a greenbelt site, and you think, well, hang on, you live over there.
Exactly.
50 years ago, your house would have been greenbelt. What's the difference?
It cracks me up. Exactly that. Everyone, people, your typical. But look, it's human nature that people just don't like change. Yeah. But exactly. They're complaining about horrible property developers, whilst they're most of them living in houses built by property developers. Yeah. Complaining about people building on fields whilst living in houses that were built on fields. Exactly.
Yeah, they don't get the irony of it, do they? And then frequently you see it. Oh, yeah, but we've got to. Enough is enough. We've got to stop it now. And it's like, well, that's all very well for you to say in your house that you probably got, and you bought that at a good time and you made a load of money on it. But if you're young now trying to buy a house,
and then wondering why they're complaining about their kids and grandkids can't afford anywhere to live.
Yeah, and their kids living back with them after university, and it's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah,
it just doesn't. Yeah, that needs to. But it's so difficult, as trying to have a rational conversation with people about the greenbelt or about AONB, about building in it. You just can't. It's really difficult to do.
It is.
It's like trying to have a rational conversation with people about the NHS. They think that we want to build and just concrete. You hear it quite often. Oh, but you're wanting to concrete over the greenbelt. No, not at all.
Yeah.
We're looking at bits of it that are poorly performing, but they just can't. You just can't crack that nut, and that kind of builds up through levels of local people, councillors, people in Westminster. There's so many layers. It's not just pockets of it. It's this multifaceted thing. And someone said to me the other day, and I think I can't remember where I heard it, but I think it's so true that the greenbelt, if you just think about the greenbelt as an entity, it's got the best PR spin doctors that have ever been, isn't it? I mean, it's probably one thing in this country, the most successful policy that's ever been is greenbelt.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's like say, I'm well into nature, right? So you can understand how it's a combination of two things, isn't it? Well, I certainly don't think we should be chopping down loads of trees and things like that, and not really building on fields if you can help it. But you can't help it, and some of it makes sense. The housing's got to go somewhere, right? But it's got to be done the right way. But I can also see, there has been a lot of shite house building over the years, and and that obviously needs to change. I mean, you're lucky, you work. Carla were good,
very good.
They did a nice product. When I was at Lang's, they did a really nice product. So. There are good developers around, and so I'm all for, helping create and support more of those ones, because again, the more of those there are, the more the general public realise that they're not all horrible, greedy arseholes. That hopefully the more good housing will get created.
Definitely, and I think it's more, more entrance into the market are going to help that. SMEs doing stuff differently.
Yeah.
Seeing SMEs have evolved, become bigger builders. I think it's all helpful, but it's talking about it, it's just massively difficult, isn't it, for a lot of those developers? And I think the way that the land market works as well, it's traded on, and a lot of it you're ending up with a kind of race to the bottom of the most units, the cheapest you can build them. The highest price that you can get for them. So in some ways it doesn't work as an economy. It doesn't work as what you get. But
that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because one of the other things I think the lots of the general public don't understand, and even lots of politicians, to be honest, is basically how land is valued.
Yeah.
And what it's like. We were both land buyers. There's a lot of competition. All of the other land buyers and developers are after the same sites most of the time. If you're lucky, you'll find and create something properly off market, so there'll be minimal competition. But certainly if you're working for a big developer, and you're at Carlo, I was at Barrett's, you've got to keep feeding the building machine. You've got to literally. We're in competition for all of these sites, and so the problem really is land economics and the fact that we're forced to maximise the land value. Otherwise, we're not going to get the deal done, are we?
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. And I think people But there's a kind of misnomer from general people that they just think that developers make an absolute killing. Now, clearly they're not doing it for charity and there's profit in it, but it's not as much as people think. And it's a bloody hard way to make your money, isn't it?
It
if you
really
think about
is.
the way you do it and locking up that amount of money, the risk that you take, the time it takes to make your money back, it's not an easy game.
It's really not, which is why so many SME developers have disappeared, and they're disappearing all the time. And you know, and even the big guys. You know, you just told us a story. 2008. You know, I was an SME developer doing my own stuff then. I had 5 reasonable sized sites on the go. 4 of them were funded by RBS. They pulled the plug on everything. I nearly went bankrupt. Obviously, you were at Carla. Everyone got laid off.
Yeah.
So you know that is the nature of the industry. It's definitely not get rich quick.
Well, and also I remember 2 years before that actually, when I was at Carla, it was kind of late to 2006, about that sort of time, when the Thames Basin Heaths SPA came in. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And it was a time when it kind of almost, people sort of knew about it, but there was moratoriums put on development, on applications coming in because of the, you know, ground nesting birds, natural, or, you know, English nature at the time just said, no more development until we sort this out.
So just it's worth explaining that, because there might be some people listening or watching this that don't know what we're talking about. So, for example, back in the mid sort of 2000s, I think it was, there was I think it stemmed from a European directive.
That's right.
That created special protection areas, whereby there was literally, you couldn't, you know, there were certain ground nesting birds that used to inhabit these certain areas, and you couldn't develop within, I don't know, what it was, 500 metres, 400 metres, whatever it was at the time. And basically, you know, massive swathes of the country. I mean, look, same as you, really. I've always been in and around London in the south. I don't know if there might have been similar in the north. I'm not sure.
I think it was quite a specific area to the southeast. And for Carla, they were in the middle of that area. They had sites in Ascot, in Sunningdale, in other places, and I think they had about 4 or 5 of their sites where literally nothing was going to happen. They weren't going to get planning on them. They weren't able to put planning applications in then. And talking about feeding the machine, that machine that they'd relied on was stuck. It was frozen. It was like a broken machine. You can't put anything into the front end of it, so nothing's going to come out the back end of it. So it was a really tense moment for them, and that lasted for kind of about a year until it got kind of resolved of how they were going to do that.
I mean, even now, even after that, it's made planning very difficult in those areas. You know, there's still lots of sites that are pretty much rendered largely undevelopable because of their proximity to the SPA and stuff like that.
And it's the same as what's, you know, recently happened in the last 3-4 years with water neutrality, with nitrate neutrality, with phosphates. So these things can kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, they don't come without warning. There's always sort of, you know, a feeling that something's going to happen on these bits. But, you know, if all of a sudden there's a moratorium on planning applications, that is almost can be fatal for developers, particularly a smaller developer, an SME, and Carla were kind of like a smaller developer, so that really affected them. So it was I remember being in Carla at that time and thinking, this is not good, and it was all right. They had other sites, but others didn't. You know, that did bankrupt people, didn't it? The whole SPA thing.
Absolutely. So
people came out of it really badly. So you never know what's going to happen, and no one knew the credit crunch was going to happen. No one knew the pandemic. The global pandemic was going to happen. It shows that those things, and you've got to be kind of agile and resilient as a individual and as a business as well. And you know, there are things that happen, and you know, Carla, unfortunately, it meant that land wasn't happening anymore. Credit crunch came in, redundancy. So kind of happens. But it's. For a lot of people out there, you know, watching this, probably have never experienced, you know, if you've been in the industry even 10, 15 years now, there's not been a downturn, has there?
No. So anyway, we haven't even got onto the PRP bit yet.
Right, okay.
So you were at Tower Hamlets.
I was at Tower Hamlets, and then we were doing an estate regen scheme, and I was sort of not in charge of, but part of the group that were picking the architects to do this kind of estate regen site. really interesting projects to get involved in kind of, in a inner city region. Is really kind of, nothing I'd been involved in before. Anyway, PRP were one of the people that were bidding on it at the time, and kind of got to know a few of the people there. And then, they were wanting to kind of expand their planning team. They were a big architects firm, still are.
Yeah, I like them. Was Chris Rudolph there, or had he left?
He'd just left when I joined. He'd not long left at all, actually. And they had quite a small, as you know, PRP. They had a Surrey office that was just down the road from me. Big London office, Manchester at the time as well. They had a China office, Russia office. It was quite a big outfit.
Yeah.
But they had quite a small little kind of planning team that was kind of one planner in Surrey, one planner in London. And they were going away, not away from, but as part of their kind of architecture to bring other services in, sort of landscape, environmental, those different bits. So they wanted to grow the planning team. And I kind of came in, there was a planning director at the time there, moved on, and then I kind of took the planning director seat and kind of grew the team. And it was always quite a small part of PRP. We grew it to, I think, probably about 8-9 people was the maximum it was there. So it was quite a small part of it, but really good being in that environment.
So were you usually doing the planning that you also doing the architecture on, or
a bit of both actually?
Yeah.
So some that they were doing the architecture on, where we were working, and you had kind of architects and landscape and planning and environmental sustainability all kind of working on a single site, which was good. But frequently just doing the planning work as a standalone planning consultant alongside other architects, which they were totally happy with. And it worked really well. And I was kind of, in there as one of the kind of senior management teams. So it gave me a real kind of insight into how a company really kind of works, and the financial side of it, and just kind of managing, a bigger practice. There was, 280 people there. So it's quite a big firm, and really exciting stuff that they did, really good schemes. And it was a really good kind of environment to work in, very kind of dynamic, very kind of creative, fantastic place to work. And kind of was there for nearly 9 years in the end.
Oh, it's that long? Was it 9 years? Wow.
Yeah. And while I was working there, I was always conscious that planning was a small side of what the kind of wider architects side did, and I think they'd got it to a point where that was kind of the maximum that they wanted it to do. And I just thought, when you've got enough out of a job, don't you? And you just think, I've kind of achieved everything I wanted to achieve there, done everything I wanted to do. And you can kind of see two routes, can't you? You can think, well, I could stay here for, the rest of my days. I'm very happy at PRP, but you just think, is there something else out there? Is there a different way that I can go at this point as a planner? And at that point, I'd kind of, over that previous 10, 15 years, I'd transitioned away from kind of land to just, almost planning was all that I was doing then. I never wanted to go back to land. I didn't want to. No, I just was too kind of ingrained in planning at that point. And obviously working with a lot of land guys, I like it. Still, but I miss about the land side is that kind of the thrill of the deal, isn't it? That was always a good part of it and doing it. But it's difficult, isn't it? Being a land guy in a developer, it can be like being a football manager, can't it? You can things can go away from you, and it can't quite work. And it's
interesting. So because now obviously you will no doubt be dealing with land
all the time,
people for developers, yeah. So it's interesting. So I often say this to people, like, when I realised I wanted to be a developer, and it wasn't all about construction, then I started realising, wow, I really need to learn about land and planning. So I decided, the best way to become a really good developer was to get really good at land. So I became a trainee land buyer, and then, usual story, and then went up the ranks. But I always found when it came to land buyers, and I don't know if it's still like this, because it's like when you're sort of in the game and you're working for house building, you go to the same dues, you're bidding on the same sites, everyone sort of knows each other, and a lot of them move around a lot. Yeah, so I was 5 years with Langs and then 5 years with Barrett's, but lots of land buyers you know, they do shit deals, and then they move on, don't they? And they've worked for a lot of different developers. But I always found that when it came to land buyers, I think you sort of get two types.
All right.
This is be interested to know what you think. I think you sort of get like wide boy wheeler dealers, good with the gab, you know, gifted the gab and all that sort of chat.
Yeah.
And then you get other ones that are sort of super detailed on it and all the rest of it.
Which one are you, Paul?
Well, I think I'm both, actually.
I'd agree, yeah.
Seriously, and that's because, and I think to be really good, you do need to be both. You've got to know about all the technical stuff. You can't just leave it to someone else because it's so, you know, it just factors into everything, more so now than ever. So, yeah, of course, you've got to understand all the technical stuff and be totally on it, including being good at planning. And of course, you've got to know how to talk to people and be a little bit streetwise and know how to do a deal, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get that many that can do both, you know.
I think you're right, and I think also, you know, and talking about planning where it's all gone to as a land guy, you've got to know all of those things now, haven't you? When you're looking at a site, to know, you know, what you've got to do to get that through the planning system. So it's hard, I think, and you're right. The good. There are some good planning, some great land guys out there, but yeah, I think unless you're that all being kind of land guy, you'd struggle, wouldn't you, in the industry?
I think so, and I think the same applies to developers because lots of all the people we know. I think, you know, most of the best land people, they either end up being the MDs or chairman of the big house builders because it's so important, obviously knowing how to do the right deals and get the right land, or they end up going off and doing their own thing. Because, you know, it is the most important thing. You know, if you're not finding and buying the right land and doing the right deals on the right terms, then you will eventually go bust. And it's a bit like, you know, like those land buyers that sort of move around and they overpay for stuff and then it all goes a bit tits up and then they go and work for another developer and then it happens again. Well, you know, you get developers like that as well. They overpay for stuff, they get desperate, and you know, and the market usually gets them out the shit until it doesn't, and then they all go bust and they disappear. And then a few years later, a whole new wave comes through. Yeah. That's the way it seems to me, anyway.
Yeah, it is, definitely. And there's some, you know, there's some young blood coming into the industry all the time. But like you say, it's the people that you and I know that have been in the game for 20, 30 years, and you know who they are. And yeah, they've moved around a bit, but they're buying land, aren't they? And again, it is a bit like being a football manager. If you're a decent football manager, you're a decent football player, it's not about who you play for, it's what you're doing, isn't it? It's not about who you're managing, it's about your results that you're getting. And I think for land guys, it's a bit like that sometimes. The decent land guys are doing it for whoever they're doing it at the time. So,
well, it's so interesting. It's like you mentioned, you know, you were beating Carlo on deals when you were at Ruskin, so they sort of came and headhunted you. That's exactly what the same happened with me when I was at Langs. I was doing loads of deals in Barrett's patch. And so in the end, they sort of come and got me. So what would you say to perhaps, like, you know, because I think we really need more SME developers in this country, yeah?
Definitely.
I mean, it's so obvious. It's like everyone, I think, well, certainly in the industry, most people know that and agree on that. What advice would you give to SME developers about how to sort of, you know, get the right deals done and solve their planning problems?
I mean, I think I think it's for SMEs. I think you've got to play to your strengths, right? So as an SME, you've not got that economy of scale that a Barrett's or a Persimmon or a Taylor Wimps or whoever might have. But what you do have is a unique way of doing things. And a lot of what makes SMEs great is the approach that they take, you know, like we're sitting in at the moment, to design. They're not beholden on things like standard house types, are they? They can go out there, they can buy different sites, they can do it. So I think that is actually their strength in being able to do that they're not having to buy a site and go, well, we can only do what's ever in our kind of copybook of sites. We can only do it on this basis. We can only do the deal on these things. That flexibility that SMEs have got, I think is the biggest thing that they've got to play on. And the government know that as well. Clearly they see the value of having SMEs. There's talk about it in the National Planning Policy Framework. There's things about it that they want more of them to happen because of what they bring to the market. They bring a kind of unique view of a site, how to do something, how to develop something, and I think that's its strength. And I think, you know, often if you're trying to buy a site, you know, you're working with that landholder, and as you know, a lot of landholders, they don't necessarily just want to sell it to the person that's going to make them the most money. For a lot of landholders, if you've owned a bit of land or it's been in your family for a long time, it's about legacy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about leaving a legacy and about being able to develop something that you're going to drive past in 10, 20, 50 years' time and think that still looks really good.
Exactly.
And I think the sites that do still look really good, it's not, you know, I don't want to paint a picture that big house builders bad, SMEs good. It's not like that. But I think certainly the sites that you and I know that are good sites, it's the ones that SMEs have done quite often.
Yeah, look, there were some great SME developers around, weren't there? Like, I mean, obviously, you know, Banner were good, weren't they?
Yeah.
They did lots of, you know, really good stuff. So they do exist.
Yeah.
I mean, and even I've got to say, even like lots of the bigger ones aren't that bad. I mean, actually, I don't want to say too much about Barrett's. Well, I'll tell you what I will say is when I was at Barrett's over 20 years ago, they were, you know, still are the biggest house builder. They were boggish standard. They were the same as everyone else. They weren't the best, let's just say, right? Having said that, all my schemes were pretty much London, so they were all bespoke. You know, I use people like PRP, you know, so they and I've always been into design, right? So I made sure they weren't not, you know, the less good ones. Sure. But now, you know, I actually think Barrett's are pretty good. I think Taylor Wimpey are pretty good. You know, there are a couple of other the big ones that I think are quite good. So they are trying to do things the right way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still some ones that are not good. I'm really tempted to fucking name them.
Go on.
Persimmon.
I was going to say Persimmon. I'm not a big fan of Persimmon.
Yeah.
I've never worked with them.
Yeah.
But like, it's an interesting story, right? So I was working with Carla Holmes on a site that they did out in Colchester, right? And this is when I was at PRP. This was their Essex region. And there was a big development called Stanway on the outskirts of Colchester. And it got planning, I think it was way back, you know, like 2005, 2006, something like that, for like 1,000 units. And they'd built kind of phase 1 and phase 2 and done a few bits there. I can't remember, I think it was Countryside, the first couple of phases, and then not much at all happened. You know, credit crunch happened, and then it kind of got mothballed a bit. And I think the land ownership changed hands. Whatever happened, then it was kind of 2016 maybe, then they start to sell other phases. It went to O&H bought it, you know, those guys?
Yeah.
They bought it from the landholder, and then they started to sell off the different parcels. And Persimmon did one of the phases on it, and they did a right shocker on it. The quality was poor, didn't finish the roads properly, it just looked bad. It looked all right in the planning drawings. I remember looking at it, but you looked at it on, and it just didn't look great at all. Carla came in to do the next phase of it, but I remember being told by the planners, and they had this urban designer at the council, this has got to be good, guys, and actually it's got to be really good because Persimmon did such a bad job, so it's got to be so much better than them. Yeah. So they put the pressure on Carla, rightly so in many ways, but probably Carla had to jump through more hoops because Persimmon did such a bad job on that. Probably naming and shaming them too much for this.
Well, look, the fact of the matter is, again, look, at the end of the day, everyone needs to up their game, don't they? Really? And there is no excuse. It's not easy, but you know, it's not all about money. Obviously, it's high risk, high reward business, right? Of course, we need to make money, but it's not all about that. And if the focus is only on that, then you do end up with a lot of shite. And if you're creating shite, you deserve to be called out for it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's like I say, it's not probably wrong to call out Persimmon because they're not the only ones, and they probably do good stuff that we're not aware of. But yeah, it's I think going back to your question on SMEs, it is hard, and it's always been hard for SMEs to sort of continue on in that land market, in the planning market, in the building market, in all of that sort of thing. To build that company and to keep it going is really, really tricky. But I think it is the what makes them so special is their unique nature, and I think that's the biggest thing for SMEs. And I think it's a really good thing for people to work to look at, you know, when you're in your career and thinking, who am I going to work with? I didn't set, Ruskin Homes, I didn't set out to think I'm going to go and work with them, but they were an SME, they were a small build, but it was a fantastic experience for me personally to work somewhere like that, because you're not one of, 2,000 people working across. You're one of 25 people that you've kind of been brought into this sort of, kind of quite a tight knit kind of group, and that is what makes SMEs so good, isn't it? That they kind of bring someone in. That learning curve was just stratospheric when I was at Ruskin Homes, in quite a small kind of thing, and I just think it would have been difficult to get that experience elsewhere. I think it's such a good thing to do, and I think to go into what Banner used to be like, what the likes of maybe kind of Allevia are doing now as a kind of SME. I mean, they're getting bigger and bigger all the time. Probably not they're a large SME, if anything. That sort of experience in somewhere like that, or a Brookworth or somewhere like that, is just so good as a land guy, as a planning guy, as a construction guy. It's unique, isn't it? So
very good. So look, so there are lots of good ones out there, but they are disappearing fast. Perhaps we could round up with, what could the government do? Because I know, look, whilst I'm naming and shaming, this is the worst government for planning and housing I've ever seen in my 40th year now. They've just literally been off the scale diabolical, haven't they?
Yes, I think, and I would qualify that.
So a bit of a leading question there, really, but I think they have.
They have been bad in a lot of ways. There's no doubt about it. I can't remember the figures now, Paul, but the amount of housing ministers, the amount of planning ministers we've had is shocking. It's just such a revolving door in that kind of department, and the amount of people that have come through shows how the government view planning and kind of house building and how to do it. And I think in many ways, they're very aware of what the issues are. They know where the restrictions on supply are. They know what the issues are in the planning system, but it's just too complicated for them. And I think they also know what a big thing to unpack that is and what that would do. And they're always looking at, well, we don't want, they know Greenbelt, we're talking about Greenbelt earlier on, they don't want to go there on anything with it, because that's the Tory heartland, isn't it? So I think there's a lot that, on the planning side of things, the government haven't got right. I would say, though, there's a few things that they have done well. In rationalising down all of that planning guidance into the MPPF, probably a good thing to do.
2012, first MPPF was fantastic. If you think about it, I often talk about this to people. If you think about it, 1947 Town and Country Planning Act came about as a result of needing to get the country rebuilt after the Second World War in the planned way. MPPF really came about following the credit crunch to get the country rebuilt, and it was brilliant. Like you said, it got rid of tons and tons and tons of PPGs, circulars, all sorts of stuff into the first MPPF, which was brilliant actually. Probably the most positive bit of planning policy I can remember. But then of course over time, and it was actually all right for a few years when it got left alone.
And then it's been tinkered with. That's the problem, isn't it? Tinkering at the edges of it and not really doing that whole scale change. So I think that's again, things like levelling up, the government had such this big agenda on levelling up that hasn't worked, has it? There's no levelling up, and I think one of the other things that has really failed, I think you could say hasn't worked well, is localism, isn't it? This whole idea that the government had is a great idea of giving the power to neighbourhoods, plans and how all that works, but it hasn't worked, has it?
Sadly,
it hasn't worked for the neighbours. It hasn't worked for neighbourhoods. Hasn't worked for communities. Hasn't worked for the developers. Hasn't worked for the planning industry. And I think I heard it said again, a while ago, that localism over-promised but under-delivered. And I think that's so. There's a lot of things, isn't there, that this government have promised on planning reform or on what they're going to do on the housing market, and they've over-promised on it, but actually on the delivery side of it, it's just not come through, has it? And that's the biggest problem, the biggest disappointment.
It has, and I've got to say, one of the things that does annoy me is when, you know, people in the industry that have literally been there, seen it, done it, still trying to do it at the coalface, know what the problems are, tell them what the problems are, and it just gets ignored.
Yeah.
It is frustrating.
It is, but I think that, again, you know, the government have tried to talk the talk on things like local authorities. If you're not performing as a local authority, we'll put you under special measures, you know, housing delivery test, those sorts of things. But actually, and I think the local authorities, even though they've never followed through properly, there's not enough impacts, is there, for those authorities that haven't delivered on local plans or haven't delivered on housing numbers. And because I think the government know what can they do. There's not enough kind of the stick, is there, of the carrot and stick. They can really kind of drill down on underperforming local authorities to do that on, and I think that's tricky. And again, I think it's just that within central government, those departments, you know, whilst there's obviously very clever people, very talented people there, I don't think they properly understand the industry. They don't properly understand what we have worked in, what we've done. And I think that, like you say, they need to be told, but equally, I think they need to go and seek it out. I think of what they need to look at. And they, you know, I noticed the other day that Sue Barkin, the Barkin review that was done in 2008 or whatever, 2004, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's 20 years old. She's redoing that. And
Classic, isn't it?
But then when you look at it though, and I kind of, you know, took an opportunity to pick it up and have a look at it and think, well, let's have a think about, it was actually really interesting, and what she said and what the recommendations that she made, if they had all have been followed, we'd have a completely different industry now.
Well, that's the point, and it's a classic, isn't it? You know, 20 years ago, report actually had some good stuff in it. Yeah. Hardly any of it got implemented. No. And here we are. Well, let's get back to do another one 20 years later. Yeah. So what, we're going to ignore that as well?
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it. You know, where will it go? I think one of the other biggest failings that we've had is just around how development and infrastructure works, because it doesn't, does it, really? The way that we kind of think around, well, you're getting kind of, you know, 100 units, 200 units, or even less, you know, cumulatively, and what then gets delivered in terms of infrastructure. Yeah. And the whole idea of SIL and things like that hasn't
not really worked,
has it? And this is the thing when, again, I've stood in dusty village halls too many times over the years on schemes that are great schemes, but you get told time and time and again, not necessarily by people that just don't want it, people saying, well, I can't get into the local schools, I can't get into the local GP surgery, I can't get dentist appointment. It's true. We know it's true, but equally there should be a better link for those people to go, well, actually, if we do get those 50 homes on the edge of our village, we will get a doctor's surgery. It will happen. And it just doesn't, it does happen sometimes. And it's not that there's a complete disconnect, but it doesn't happen enough.
It's not enough, is it?
And I think for a lot of people, they don't make that link between development and infrastructure, which it should be. They make completely the opposite link of thinking, actually, with that development, it's going to get even worse. I'm going to wait even longer for a GP appointment.
Which is true if the infrastructure is not sorted out at the same time, isn't it? So, yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest failings of the government, not to sort of do something around how infrastructure can work, and for people to make that link that development's a good thing, because that's how infrastructure improvements
and local communities are going to get more of what they need.
Yeah.
That is the way it should be.
Totally.
Okay, well, that's probably a good place to finish it off.
Enjoyed it, Paul.
So yeah, thank you, mate. Well, do come again.
Yeah, I will.
Cheers,
good.
Mate. Thank you.
Really good. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week, where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes, and a much more beautiful world.